This next panel combines several of the crucial aspects of the multi-domain fight and essential enablers to the maneuver fight at the tactical level. Major General Brooks took command of the Fire Center of Excellence this summer. Brigadier General Vile is the Commandant for the United States Army Cyber Warfare School. He has served in this position for the past year. He is here today representing the Cyber COE. And Colonel Coakley is the Commandant for the United States Army Intelligence School, and he's here representing the Intelligence COE. We'll open the discussion this afternoon with comments from Major General Brooks. Sir, the floor is yours.
Hey, Ed, thanks, Ryan, and thanks to the team. Good afternoon, I'm Phil Brooks, and I'm here with Command Sergeant Major Neil Sartain, my Sergeant Major. Thanks for inviting us to speak today at the conference. I'd like to start out by saying thanks to General Buzzard and the entire MCoE team. It's been a great conference. I've actually learned a lot myself, and anytime we get to talk about combined arms interoperability, it's a great day, and it takes all of us to fight in this environment that we're going into now, and I enjoy talking from sensor to shooter to sustainment with all the war fighters here in the room. So in the time that I have today, I'd like to talk about a few topics that are relevant for this conference, and I'll focus on a couple of items in line from the fire's perspective with the Vice's focus areas. And the majority of my remarks will be dedicated to fires at the division and below. I'll speak on how we're contributing our portion of the delivery of Army 30 and designing the Army of 2040. And related to that, I'll update you on evolving requirements for both the field artillery and the air defense artillery branches in accordance with the AR 522. I am the proponent for both. So if you think General Beagle is a crazy 3-star with a couple 4-stars that are giving him direction, just look at the 2-star in front of you. It's even crazier right now. And then I'll talk some modernization. I'll talk about a little bit about, as General Buzzard alluded to, the joint counter-UAS realm that we're supporting now on behalf of the Joint Staff. And finally, for those in the back, I'll close out my comments and talk about some best practices from the combat training centers and observations there because the 07s from the fires also provide input to me quarterly, and I receive some of those. So I'll share some free chicken for the maneuver company commanders, future and past, so that you can use those. But I'll start out talking about warfighting as the Vice opened up this conference with. And at the Fire Center, we're fostering that same warfighting culture and mentality that General Buzzard spoke to you about earlier today. And I want to emphasize here, we're laser focused on being brilliant at the basics, just like the SMA mentioned as he opened up as well. And key to that is the ability at echelon to field a ready and disciplined force that are masters of its tasks and battle drills. And we also host a significant number of highly technical MOSs and programs of instruction at the Fire Center of Excellence. Some of those include our targeting warrants, our target mensuration courses, and our JTAC program. Those will be vital to each and every one of you in the future. So I would take note of that, get that in your green books. Secondly, delivering combat-ready forces, and in line with the Army's adjustment, the Army of 2030 realigns the direct support field artillery battalions under the DIVARTIs. It also rounds out the Division Air Defense Battalion and extended range fires capabilities. Now these DIVARTIs, as mentioned earlier, are part of the total Army that General Matlock alluded to, and will be re-energized in both Compos 1 and 2, so you'll see growth in the National Guard of the Division Artilleries as well. This renewed ability will allow us to weight the main effort by designating field artillery support relationships and leverage the division's combat power more effectively and give that divisional commander greater flexibility as the unit of action in accordance with 3.0. And the events in Ukraine have illustrated in real time the quickly evolving character of the large-scale combat operations, and both contextually and physically on the ground and in the air. So the continued proliferation, as we've heard for the last 2 days of UAS, the volume of fires, the rapid and dynamic targeting that's ongoing, and new technologies such as hypersonics have presented a paradigm shift in the modern battlefield. And battle space geometries, airspace deconfliction, protection zones, EW spectrums, and advanced computing, just to name a few, will provide challenges to you within the brigade and division commanders' battle space. So rudimentary from a brigade and below fire's perspective, the imperative of clearly delineating engagement authorities, whether it be the battalion mortars or cannon artillery, is increasingly important. And so disciplined attack guidance matrices and high payoff target lists are even more important. And these elements have to be paired with fast-acting targeting efforts supported through deliberate target acquisition, which will consist of ground and aerial reconnaissance, as you've heard previously. Forward observers, our radars, exquisite intelligence, which you'll hear from Colonel Coakley shortly about, and even more. So thirdly, in terms of continuous transformation, let me just start by saying one thing that will not change is that the traditional relationships of maneuver elements and their fire supporters. To maintain dominance in large-scale combat, we're aggressively pursuing the delivery of the Army of 2030 and the design of 2040 and our CDID and our cross-functional teams through Army Futures Command are doing great work by bringing in new technologies and formations to fruition at a rapid pace. And we're doing that with platforms, with sensors and munitions. And as General Flynn alluded to yesterday, one example is the multi-domain task forces. So with the changing nature of the battle space geometries, we're pushing cannon artillery ranges out from 30 kilometers with rocket-assisted projectiles to ranges in excess of 60 kilometers. The Precision Strike Missile Program pushes Army surface-to-surface engagement options well beyond the current munitions of ATACMS and guided MLRS, enabling Theater Fires Command and elements to engage operational and strategic targets that have not been seen since the Cold War. And as directed, we've taken on the mission of establishing a joint counter-UAS university to support the Army's requirements and our international allies and partners that are in here today. The program will be officially IOC in October, but we've already started some of our classes. And there are 3 courses that are offered at Fort Sill currently. One is the operator course, the second is a planning course, and then thirdly, an installation protection course that will support all of the Army's installations. These courses are ASI producing, and they're in ATARs already. The counter-UAS fight is one that will belong to all of us, as we've heard for the last 2 days. We must also look critically at how we utilize our concealment, and you'll hear from General Beck later on that, our battlefield dispersion and our survivability moves. And we can be sure we'll be under constant observation. Beyond the Joint Counter-UAS University, we owe the team best practices to counter this ever-evolving threat, and we'll get that out as a part of our strengthening the profession there. The development and fielding of mid-range capability and long-range hypersonics in the Army's multi-domain task forces provide our land component commanders strategic standoff capability. And you've heard that yesterday from the United States Army Pacific, and I hear the same thing from the United States Army Europe and Africa. Our commandants, CDID, and .D teams have the heavy haul of not only providing the material solutions, but we've got the doctrine, POI, and subsequently soldiers to operate those systems. We remain engaged in the facilities investment program, and I've got to brief the Department of the Army week after next on the facilities for the institutional training base, and I look forward to that challenge as well. Tied to fielding of the MRC and hypersonics, we're seeing organizational growth and the establishment of these multi-domain task forces, and more are scheduled, and we've already activated the 1st, 2nd, and third, the first and third going to the Pacific, and the second in Europe. And they're already operational and exercising in parts of pathways, and most recently in Arcane Thunder in the United States Army Europe and Africa exercises. And we're learning from each and every one of those exercises and building every day. The conversion of our MLRS formations from a 2x8 formation to a 3x9, 3 batteries, 9 launchers, will put more launchers in the field and provide greater flexibility. And as we're seeing today, mass and magazine depth are increasingly relevant on the battlefield. In our air defense, new systems such as the IFPC, or the Indirect Fire Protection Capability, are nearing operational employment. And the Army will employ IFPC-equipped forces in the MDTFs, in core units, bridging the gap between our tactical short-range air defense and our strategic terminal high-altitude air defense THAAD and Patriot systems. Tactical level air defense assets are also being reintroduced to the division level, capable of task organization at the brigade combat team and below levels. MSHORAD and directed energy equipped vehicles, as well as counter UAS batteries, will significantly enhance the ability on the front line and rear area units for protection. And we've already fielded the first battery in the 82nd, as well as the 1st Cavalry Division. And we're learning from both of those new equipment training and fielding exercises as we speak. And finally, strengthening the profession. We're updating FM 309 to better nest with multi-domain operations, and the principles and characteristics of fire support planning and execution remain unchanged. But we've got to ensure we're nested with the Army's current operational framework. We've also recently published FM 360, our Army Targeting Doctrine, and ATP 301.81, the Counter UAS Techniques publication, and I encourage each of you to take a look at those. And as always, we welcome your feedback. Our PME and programs of instruction are an important vehicle to build resiliency and enforce those standards, and we continually face that challenge of maintaining a current POI, just like all of the other centers of excellence, with the character of warfare changing as fast as it is changing. And in the spirit of continued learning and sharing of experiences, we have multiple venues, such as the Fires Bulletin, our branch journals, and we're also participating in the Harding Project that General Brito mentioned yesterday. So for the young combat leaders here today, I'll leave you with some best practices from the CTCs. As General Rainey alluded, we've got to maneuver to enable our fires in the future. And I'll be the first to admit I like to hear that. You got to get your FIST teams to their OPs early to ensure they're in position and ready to observe on time. We've lost that focus, and we've got to continue to renew that focus. Our fire support teams that follow a maneuver element are not prepared to perform their primary function, and I was talking with a sergeant major earlier today, and we've lost that art, and we've got to regain that. This includes professional and social settings. We've got to pull our FIST teams and our fire supporters under our wings here at the Maneuver Center. We've got to build those relationships early, build that trust early, just like you heard in the previous forum, so when they come on the net, we know exactly where we need to focus. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. We've got to integrate our fire support rehearsals into our combined arms rehearsals repeatedly. Probably the most important rehearsal you're going to do at a combat training center, I would submit, having been a veteran of about 36 rotations now. And then synchronizing fires with maneuver enables a greater chance of success. We've got to integrate our air defense into the planning and our targeting process and think about attacking aircraft rather than waiting to respond to those attacks. And I know some of that has already been implemented into the program of instruction here at the career course, and I look forward to seeing the results of that. Again, thanks to the entire team here for inviting me today, and I look forward to hearing to questions from you. So with that, I'll turn it over to General Vile.
Hey, outstanding. Hey, Brian Vile, DCG of the Cyber Center of Excellence, home of both the Signal and the Cyber Schools. So I know all of you really want to know what is it that we do at the Cyber Center of Excellence. And I'd offer it really boils down to two things. First, we enable and defend friendly use of cyberspace and the electromagnetic spectrum, the EMS. And then the second thing we do is we deny our adversaries the use of cyberspace and the EMS. If we're successful, you're going to fight like it's 2030. And if we're successful, the adversary is going to fight like it's 1914. We're going to force them back to carrier pigeons. We're going to force them back to runner on foot. We're going to force them back to dumb weapons. And if we're successful, we're going to get their S-6s fired. That's what we do for you at the Cyber Center of Excellence. Now, what I've been asked to talk about today is electromagnetic warfare, EW. Used to be known as electronic warfare, now we call it electromagnetic warfare. Now, having taught at Building 4, believe it or not, used to teach OBC here many, many years ago. If you remember nothing else, I want you to remember this, 8 minutes. So you can write it down in your books, really simple, really small. So what is 8 minutes? After you break squelch on your radio, you're going to learn two things 8 minutes later. Number one, how good was your emissions control, your MCOM? And number two, how good are the enemy's EW soldiers? Because 8 minutes is the doctrinal time it's going to take the adversary's EW guys to knock out your grid coordinate, send it back to Fires, the king of battle, and have them launch effects on your targets. And if your MCON wasn't good, and the adversary EW soldiers were, you're going to get incoming. Think about the displays that are all out in the hallway. How many of those are using the electromagnetic spectrum? Let me give you a clue. If it has a video feed, it's using the EMS. If it's moving data and it doesn't have a cord, it's using the EMS. And if it requires external controls or external input, it's using the EMS, the electromagnetic spectrum, radio waves. And if you're using the EMS, you can be seen. And if you can be seen, you can be found. And if you can be found, you can be targeted. You need to get this right. Because if you don't, you will have 8 minutes until technology punishes unskilled commanders and untrained soldiers. So, BCT commanders, those that are going to the BCTs, what are your big gaps? Simply put, it's EW. Now, when we talk about EW, I encourage people, stop talking about EW and start talking about the three components. That's EP, ES, and EA, electromagnetic protection, electromagnetic support, and electromagnetic attack. So first off, see yourself. That is what electromagnetic protection is. What do you look like in the EMS? Now, that's not a trivial question because you can't see it, you can't feel it, at least you shouldn't feel it. You don't know what it looks like unless you're enabled, unless you have those EW capabilities built into your formations. Now, what's interesting about this is there's some formation or some emitters that you know about. You know you have radios, you know you have radars, but there's also emitters you might not know that you have. During a recent JRTC rotation, what OPFOR did is they put a cell phone, hung it off a UAS, and they flew it over the battlefield, and they found a battalion TOC because of its EMS signature. And one of the things that gave them away was a soldier's CPAP machine. Now, if you don't know what a CPAP machine is, wait until you're 50 years old and you'll figure it out. See, the old people laugh, young ones don't get it. So during a recent NTC rotation, or excuse me, during a recent warfighter, one of the things that happened was there was a commander striker and it was driving around. And the alternator wasn't grounded. You ever gone down the highway and you hear the static on the radio? For those of us who used to listen to radios, it's generally because there's a fault in the electrical system. We're able to see that in the EMS, and we were able to track a vehicle moving across the battlefield because somebody had failed to properly attach the ground strap. You can see generators in the EMS. And so the capability you need as commanders, as warfighters, is the ability to see yourself the way that my soldiers see you. Now, the second thing is seeing the adversary. We call this electromagnetic support. The enemy uses the EMS just like we do, and we should punish them for doing so. Where are they? Who are they talking to? We can see the patterns. We can watch this guy cue, this guy cue, this guy cue, this guy cue, and you very quickly figure out the patterns of life that allow you to identify the C2 node, the support nodes, based on specific frequencies that are only located on specific platforms. We can tell you where your radars are. We can tell you where your ADA assets are. Everybody has a unique signature on the battlefield. ES is going to help you identify and prioritize and locate these targets on the battlefield so that you can target them. And whether it's a CPAP machine or an ungrounded generator, it's up to you as commanders to figure out where you're going to deliver kinetic effects. Now finally, delivering effects through the EMS. We call this electromagnetic attack, or EA. This can be jamming, and back in the old days, that's exactly what it was. You crank the volume up to 11, push out power, and you stop them from talking. The cool thing is technology advanced to the point where we're able to do what we call special purpose electromagnetic attack, or SPEA. This is where we're able to use low power attacks in order to prevent the communication signal from ever setting up a session. We're basically just blocking them from talking by breaking down the protocols. They just can't set up the call instead of overpowering. And the interesting thing is if you want to go after a counter UAS or small UASs, knock down GPS, very low power signal, knock down the command and control signal, and I guarantee you that that drone is going to crash into the ground and you're going to deliver a kinetic equivalent effect. The power of a GPS signal, it's a 50-watt emitter 20,000 kilometers overhead. Think about it. The cell phone in your pocket when you're driving using Waze, it is pulling power off of something, a 50-watt light bulb, 20,000 kilometers away. That's amazing technology, but it's also incredibly easy to overpower and jam. And that's what's going to happen to you when you go and fight into the EMS, and it's my job to do it to the adversary. Now, what we can also do is what's called tactical deception. Give the adversary a false understanding of the battlefield. We all have patterns of life. Let's build patterns of life. Let's present those opportunities to them and force the adversary's fires in order to reveal their location so we can do counter battery. Now, I just told you these are the gaps, so the real question is, where are we at? So today, your ability to perform these functions is incredibly limited. The Army's at the beginning of its adventure building out EW. EW got pulled out of the Army before most of us ever joined. And so we've been rebuilding it ever since we learned that counter-IEDs really had a huge EW component. And so what are we doing for you, BCTs? First, material solutions, the toys, the things everybody loves to talk about. In the next couple of years, you're going to be getting spectrum analyzers. What's a spectrum analyzer? Simply going to tell you what you look like in the EMS. It's going to point out where the emitters are, where you're giving out signatures, and it's going to show you what you look like to the adversary. We're also fielding a man-packed radio, and that's not going to just let you detect the adversary, but it's also going to let you deliver localized effects. This is going to be huge, and it's going to be a game changer for your ability to train your soldiers down at the battalion and the platoon level. Because what you're going to be able to do with this capability is use it against your own soldiers. Let your EW guys be your own Op4. Feel what it's like to operate in an environment where EWS is being jammed or your communications are being degraded. Now, a little bit farther out, what we're developing is high volume, low cost, and attritable solutions. Think about number 2 cross tips, BII on your Humvee and most of the vehicles in the Army. It's expendable, durable. If you lose it, you don't worry about it, but you generally try to keep it under control. These are the type of solutions that we're trying to push onto the battlefield for EW. High volume, low cost, attritable. Because the nature of my game is if I'm doing EW, it's emitting a signal. And because it's emitting a signal, it's going to be able to be killed. So I'd much rather it be a low-cost, replaceable, battery-powered device than something that is manned by a soldier or a high-dollar vehicle. We want to build payloads for launched effects. Think small UASs. So we can deliver EW effects at Pacific relevant ranges. We're looking at building something called MEMS, a horrific acronym, but it's the Modular EMS System. And what that's going to do is provide EA and ES disaggregated from the soldier. Think of a capability, a small device, you fast cam or volcano out onto the battlefield and you litter it. It sits there, it's quiet. You send out a signal, you turn it on. It immediately starts doing ES. It's looking for adversary signals. Then as you go into the attack, it starts the jam. And then when the battery runs out, you forget about it and fire out more. And what we can also do with MEMS, because new radios are so mature, we're also able to do that tactical deception piece. Fire out MEMS and pretend it's a battalion talk. Let it set up a pattern of life and let the adversary think that's where you're at. Now, all of this is going to require planning and management. So we have a piece of software, it's called the EW Planning and Management Tool. We're still maturing that solution. And what that's going to do for you is it's going to let you synchronize and do clearance of EW fires. EW needs a clearance of fires process just like fires needs an EW, just like fires needs a clearance of fires process. If you don't have skilled and trained EW warriors, you're going to learn the way the Russians did because you're going to conduct fratricide. You're going to jam yourself. Now for organizations, where are we at? Right now, about 2/3 of the BCT EW platoons are activated. Over the course of the next 2 years, we're going to activate the rest of them. Most of them are floating around 80% strength. Healthy with lieutenants, healthy with junior NCOs and soldiers. Where we're a lot weaker at is with your brigade staffs, particularly the company and field grade officers. We're only about 45% filled. By the time we get to 2030, we should be in a much healthier position, and you'll be able to leverage those staffs so you can start to conduct and integrate EW into your operations. Now, for training strategy, we work very, very closely with FORSCOM on this, and what we're doing is developing an EW training strategy. How and what do we train at home station? What are we doing at the CTCs in order to test our forces and make sure that they're trained so that they don't get slapped in the face on day one when they realize enemy EW capabilities? Now, most importantly, what we're doing is we're also building leaders that are educated and trained to fight in the EMS. 6 months ago, we kicked off a pilot program here at the Maneuver Center of Excellence, integrating EW into Ranger School, the Officer Basic course, and the Officer Advanced course. Our 17 Echo Sergeant First Class just signed in on the 10th. He's in processing this week and will be in CTD whenever he's done in processing. And we have a 17 Bravo that's going to be arriving next summer, an EW officer, in order to better integrate training. Out at the Fire Center of Excellence, we're heavily invested in supporting the Joint Counter UAS University. Many of the solutions that are going to bring down drones are going to be EW solutions. And by 2030, what we hope to have, or what we will have, is EW integrated across TRADOC so that all soldiers and all leaders are capable of fighting and winning in the EMS. So to wrap this up, just going to do that foot stomp again. Okay, 8 minutes. Commanders at every echelon need to get this right, because if you don't, the king of battle is going to tell you the hard way 8 minutes later. Thanks.
Good afternoon. You know, one of the things that you heard, foot stomped, I think, even from the USASOC and the Special Forces Center of Excellence side, was there's a human domain, right? There's a technical domain, there's a procedural one. And I think that what you'll see as a common theme is that we've talked about data. You've heard from some of the senior leaders say you can focus on some of those material solutions, but at the end of the day, there is absolutely an interpersonal and a human element. And certainly on the intel side, we're looking at things that are in that ES spectrum and others for those indications and warning. But at the end of the day, if you get nothing else out of like a question that says, what do you expect of your intel soldiers or the intel center and what they're there to do to support you as a commander, it should be that they're thinking and learning and spending all their time trying to figure out how that enemy commander thinks. And really the only way to do that certainly is a lot of studying, but you actually have to get in the dirt, you have to be on the terrain, you have to be at CTCs, you have to operate as an opposing force, you have to talk to every single specialty, every warfighting function, and understand how those work in order to even do something like that. And what I want to tell you is, for us at the Intel Center, things are pretty simple. The one focus, we're operational support, and what we're doing there is focusing on the warfighter. So if a student comes out of that institution, goes into a formation, and they don't understand that their primary job is to support a commander's decision-making process, they're probably off to a bad start. And that's really where we first focus. So if you look at what that Intel Center does, and I want to really thank General Buzzard for giving all of us the opportunity to be here and share some of what each of the warfighting function does and what they do at the Centers of Excellence. So on behalf of General Applehans, who is the CG of the Intel Center of Excellence, Command Sergeant Major Townsend, and our Chief Command Warrant Officer, Pete Davis, I really want to thank General Buzzard and this audience for this opportunity. So at the schoolhouse, right from private to colonel, you have folks who are in there, and all those MI soldiers are at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, really for one thing, to be trained on all the capabilities, the methods that are related to FM20. And here at AUSA, 1 October, the new FM20 will be published, much like 360 and targeting was recently published. And the whole point of that is FM30 went out focused on multi-domain operations. They didn't change the title. It still says operations. But there is a need for doctrine to address what's in multi-domain ops. I would tell you we've all probably been doing a piece of multi-domain ops for a long time, but there is a need to describe what that doctrine is and how we support it. And that's what we're focused on. Ultimately, those folks are out there to really make sure that they're delivering those capabilities and that understanding to the commander. So when you look at that one goal, supporting the warfighter, I think that looks different at each echelon. And we heard from some of the senior leaders today that that's what we do. That's what's kind of unique about the Army. If you talk to the Navy and the Air Force, they certainly have certain echelonment, but when you talk about the concept of doing something other than a carrier strike group or other than something that may be done with agile combat employment, the conversation starts to get different, because in the Army, we actually have to be able to fight at each of those echelons in order to do what we do. And Intel and several other warfighting functions are there to support everyone at those same levels. So we have to be able to train across that spectrum. Now, if we look at this here, and we're just talking about capabilities, there are certain capabilities that are currently resident in a BCT. There's an RStruck, and there's some other decisions in the Army that have not been completely made yet that may take some of those capabilities and move them to other echelons. But what won't change is those capabilities exist to downward reinforce from that either IEW battalion that's up in a division to ensure that the BCT still has a MCCOE. And if you're in a separate brigade or you're in a particular situation where that formation may not be getting an IEW battalion, some of those BCTs, and certainly an armored BCT, maintains that MCCOE. What won't leave those formations is an EW capability and a UAS capability, which I think we've heard talked about a lot, because at the end of the day, if you are a commander, you certainly don't want to lose those fires. You certainly don't want to lose your eyes. And part of those eyes is also an ears capability that comes out of the EW. And in every conversation from the CTC level to commanders in combat, one thing is resounded: you don't want to lose those. And when I'm trying to get into the head of an enemy commander and assist my supported maneuver commander, that's absolutely the first thing we're looking at when we're prioritizing high-value targets, from what's important to the enemy's plan, and trying to develop what are high payoff targets for the targeting side. If you go in and you cut out that enemy's eyes, you cut out their ability to see, to listen, to understand, their logistics, and certainly their counterfire assets, then the battle's already starting to sway in your favor. And it's really sometimes as simple as that. Is your intel person, apparatus, able to communicate like that and talk about what's actually important so we can focus the resources? So with that BCT, you've got a brigade intelligence support element. In a cavalry squadron, you might have, and regiment, you're going to have a regimental intelligence support element. When we look over at the assets, there's a couple of disciplines, and I won't speak to every aspect of it, but you have a signals intelligence, which tends to cross over a lot in the EW lane, and there's a lot of hand in glove that goes there and how we identify capabilities. There's human that tends to move itself up in LISCO to higher echelon so we can deal with those EPWs, the enemy prisoner of war, and other things. And then you have an imagery which goes back to this UAS piece. And I think we all know that you've got to have something small that you can put up and get those eyes. So let's talk about something that really matters, those TTPs. For me, I've worked at a lot of combat training centers. I've been in a lot of different war fighters. And what you see repeatedly, both in combat and in those centers, is that if you have creativity as a commander, if you have the ability even as a commander to go over and work on the Op 4 side, you're going to find that if you just put some UAS, depending on what type, and you fire it along a line of bearing, and you use anything from a commercial technology to something that's been fielded, you can see what's emitting in the EMS spectrum. And instead of putting a bunch of different capabilities out there, you can literally just fly along that line of bearing. You can fix the target that you want, and then you can call in whether it's mortar fires digitally or otherwise, and actually reduce that threat. And some of those creative techniques come out of those environments. The UK has a Brigberry, and in their environment, they've got one star that's over every CTC that they've got globally. And one of the things that they looked at creatively was to have something called a Mission Zero. And what they did was they said, I'll validate you on your doctrine. And once you prove that you can do that, we're going to open up creative mode, and you're going to be able to go and kind of work outside of what's there in that validation of doctrine. And that's kind of where you see the excitement and the fun come into warfighting, is when you have the opportunity to take some of those gloves off and experiment and try different things. So those are some of the exciting opportunities that are out there. I know when General Norrie was at the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, those were some of the ideas that he started to bring in there, and I'm seeing that happen at some of the other CTCs. So that kind of talks about the opportunity. You heard about C2 Fix, right? The Chief of Staff of the Army, the Acting Chief of Staff of the Army, has opened up, kind of two pieces of strategy. We're going to fix what we have now because the network is really important. That's what we have to C2 through in our PACE plan. And then we're going to pivot in the future, so that's 7 years and beyond. So part of what the Mission Command Center of Excellence is about to do next week is to pull together everyone in a TTX, and all the COEs and warfighting functions have been brought in order to do that and say, how do we fight now and how will we fight in the future to inform that? And that's going to continue to roll on out of there and go into really an experiment trial in a combat training center. Third Corps was able to do some of this in their Warfighter 23-4, and then we're going to see a CTC rotation. Maybe it's the January one, maybe it's something in the future, where what happens in that C2 Fix TTX will be put to the test in a field environment with a division over it and a brigade and battalions fighting it. And I think that'll be really exciting. When you kind of look at some of the other things that you have, Intel itself somehow has to actually train with the maneuver, and they have to understand how both a blue and an enemy commander think. So if I was to say one thing to a company commander, a platoon leader, or others, if you really want the most, if you want to demand the most out of that Intel soldier, that Intel warrant, or that officer, put him in the dirt somewhere and put him to the test, whether it's as an engineer, whether it's as something else, because that's the only way they're going to really learn how an enemy commander would think and how to be better to support you, because that's really all we do is support the decision-making process at the end of the day. Could be tactical, could be operational, could be strategic, but really today we're talking about the tactical. Tactical UAS, the Aviation Center of Excellence, is moving out with some great capabilities, not only FAR and FLRAA, but there's also a tactical UAS. Get rid of the shadow that has this long launch and recovery, and put things up that are vertical, that are easier to deploy into the field, because you've seen it, whether it's in Ukraine or others. There is a need for us to have a ubiquitous UAS capability, and we're always going to want to have eyes wherever we can. There's a TLS, a terrestrial layer system, that'll support and downward reinforce a BCT as well as work at echelons above brigade. But I think if you've seen anything in the Army, whether it's an interwar period or something else, resources are scarce. You might have to fight with whatever you have, and I think we're all seeing that while there are lots of capabilities planned for 2030, maybe it's 2040, there's a tendency to ask the question, I think it'll come up in some of the Q&A, well, hey, when is this next capability coming? And I think you heard General Rainey and even General George speak to this. There is probably an aspect at the end of the day to use what you have and be creative with what you've got, because if you focus brilliantly on those basics, if you know your job, then whatever other piece of kit or capability comes to you, that part's going to be easy. So train to the highest standard that's LSCO. Train with what you've got. People went from World War I into an interwar period and went to World War II, and they still had cardboard, cutout or plywood tanks, and they had wooden rifles, and you had, General Marshall saying, I had to learn a whole new set of skills. I think we're in some of the same place now, and that's not an excuse. I'm saying the power of our Army and our partners is leadership, and it's creativity, and I think this room's got that. And I've seen that demonstrated out in the field. that terrestrial layer system is really meant to do some of that ES, potentially distributed in different ways, you know, a capability that is distributed in different form factors across the field so that you can sense something, you can attack something, and ultimately you can use that to target and make decisions. You have a Titan system that's used a little higher echelon, but all of this stuff leverages the multi-domain capabilities, the multi-domain task forces, and if there's an exciting place to look at the things that Fires, the things that Intel, the things that Cyber EW Signal, and others, certainly ADA and Protection are doing in a multi-domain task force, that's powerful, that's exciting. The Pacific is a huge place, it's an experimentation field, and we're learning so many lessons there, including in Europe. So I've never been more excited to be in the Army, and I hope that you are too. So OSINT, right? You heard publicly available information and ability to do BDA. That publicly available information could be part of an IO campaign, so there has to be some other layer that you apply to it, even though it may take slightly longer, to validate whether that information is true or not. And we continue to train this piece. It's a place that we work with the Cyber Center of Excellence, and it's something that every commander wants to do is, how do I assess how effective I am? How do I target? And primarily, a lot of it is coming from PAI and OSINT, and we just have to focus every day on how we trust it and what ratio we use, AI or ML, in order to really enable human decisions. So for us, the last thing I'll really close with is everybody has some form of a home station training or something that they're trying to do at their center of excellence. And for us, one of those things is the J.R. Fox range. It was put in the NDAA, and it's not a one-trick pony, but it is a way to own airspace and to be able to do things in electromagnetic spectrum, to pull in A-10s, to pull in Naval Special Warfare UAS, to bring in Rangers for MLATs, firing mortars in a live fire, bringing in the multi-domain effects battalion and others to do that training. It's something that it doesn't only happen at Huachuca. There are some unique capabilities based on its airspace and the EMS, but I'm seeing that everywhere, whether it's partnering with universities from the Cyber Center of Excellence, Arizona State University for us, using things like Cyberopolis, ION, like you heard, for the use of SOC side, or SMEAR, other capabilities so that we can have a cyber replicated environment, both to do PAI, OSINT, and also to potentially do some other things to influence an information advantage. So I will really close there with that from this side, and I think we'll turn it over to any questions that there are, Ryan.
Gentlemen, thank you for those comments, and we do have time for a few questions, and I'll start off with the first one. Similar to the previous panel, the targeting chain and the integration that it took to be successful in a coin environment, we got fairly good at that with a lot of practice. You just described that each of you have a component of that targeting process, and we have pushed some of those capabilities down to the brigade level. As you look at the future environment, LSCO, and as we move to the Army of 2030, and you think about the targeting chain, the electronic warfare coordination cells inside of units, intel fusion, where do you see that going as we move into the LSCO fight in the Army of 2030?
Yeah, I'll start that, and then I'll pass it to Brian, and I'll start with his acronym. 8 minutes, I think, is what you said. First of all, I think Colonel Babbage is not here for a great reason. That's to figure out this fix OPT, and we've got to fix our networks first. We have so many mission command platforms right now that it's causing a disruption. It works for counterinsurgency operations, but it will not work for large-scale combat operations. And we've got to figure out, as a community, as a targeting community, how we decrease that time to pass those targets from whatever sensor, manned or unmanned sensor, to the appropriate shooter/effector. And I say effector because it could be a non-kinetic effect that we're trying to accomplish. But we've got so many mission command systems right now that we've got to decrease the time there in order to have those effects on the targets. The cross-functional team, the fires cross-functional team is doing a lot of work with that in terms of the airspace piece of that, so that we've got a common air picture so that we can more rapidly affect those targets that we're trying to get after. But from a digital fires perspective, we've got to figure out how to operate in the environment that General Vial spoke of, so that we can continue to affect that. Our magazine depth, we're continuing to work on with some of these new capabilities, but that's not going to get after the targeting, the kill chain or kill web as it's often referred to. And so we are continuing to work that at FCOE. I'll give it to Brian for anything.
Yeah, and you gave half the answer. So half the answer is we've gotten very good at this over the past 20 years. The challenge I have is now you're adding in a SEMA section that really hasn't played a role in the fires process or the clearance of fires process. So you've built this cadence, and now you're trying to add an extra beat into the cadence. So this is where I'd ask all commanders, grab your SEMA section at the BCT level, that's 10 soldiers, 3 of them are officers, and pound this into them. They have to get it down, they have to get it right. And part of who they're going to have to start to integrate with is non-traditional players. The Signal Corps generally hasn't been included in a clearance of fires process. Yet if you don't want to fire an EA attack and bring down your own communications, you may have to coordinate with them. This is MCO versus EW. So we have a lot to learn. It's going to take rehearsal, it's going to take practice, it's going to take competence officers, and it's going to take a lot of training. So that's the way forward. We have to be integrated.
Yeah, so one of the things I think that we run into is sometimes there's a lot of complex or hard problems to solve, but when you really look at it, though, we're back to a lot of things that the SMA said. It really is basics, and what you hear is a common thread through there. The basic I'm talking about is communicating. You can go up to a formation, a unit, and you can find 2 people sitting in chairs next to each other, or maybe in a vehicle, and they aren't able to or trained to just friggin' talk to each other. So I would say that a lot of these integration and other things come from what we normally call battle drills, and you see the best formations, they just rehearse a lot. They just take a process and they run that process, and I think we even heard that on the unclassified side from the Ukraine lessons learned. If I could do one thing, I would take this complex breach and I would do it ruthlessly over and over again, integrating fires and maneuver. You could overlay that comment to exactly what General Vial said, to anything that some of the amazing smart people in this room would say. So as a commander, you own a lot of things. Risk, creating an environment, whether that's from a safety perspective, but I would also say that training environment. And if you're on a CTC side, or you're just looking at unit training management, the real question is, do you know what your training objectives are? If you do, if you're clear and you know what those are, I want to make sure that I'm able to employ, fires within 8 minutes, I can displace, I can whatever. You're going to be freaking successful every time, because that's exactly the training environment you're going to demand either of your higher headquarters to provide for you, or you're just going to build it yourself, because we're all pretty good at pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. So a company commander, a team leader, a squad leader, you're only as good as the training that you actually want to do. And I think the CSA has really given us that levity to do that and say, hey, I know these warfighting things are important, and I'm going to be able to do those. So I would just say I love that question, but it is literally as simple as, what do you want to be good at? Lay out the process, know your job, and then ensure that whatever training environment you go into achieves that training objective. Everything else is really a distraction. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd reinforce what some of the senior leaders have said over the last couple of days, that our doctrine is sound. In 360, our targeting doctrine is sound. It has been scrutinized and scrutinized before it ever went to print. So if you're a young company battery troop commander there, it doesn't matter if you're conducting a wet gap crossing or a combined arms breach. The targeting process for your suppression and obscuration remains the same. It's how you approach it. It's MET-TC dependent, but you've got to have that mindset. You've got to understand the doctrine. And I capture that in that context because I initially thought that you were talking about our dynamic targeting initially. But when it comes to our deliberate targeting process, our doctrine remains the foundation and it's sound. So thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, gentlemen, thank you. General Vial, this one goes to you, and I'm combining several different threads inside of the Slido app here, and a lot of, the 8 minutes generated a lot of conversation there. Could you just pull the thread a little bit or expand on good emissions control and what that looks like, and then also connected to that EW spectrum management at a tactical level? What should be some considerations for a maneuver leader? Thank you.
So let me give you the quick answer. Talk to your EW experts. You know, what we educate and what we train at the cyber school is exactly that. So you have the people on your team, once you get them, whether they're enlisted, warrant officer, they're going to be able to answer those questions. Part of it is, when do you talk? When do you push data? You know, the wonderful thing about this, you know, and I think most of the junior officers will appreciate with this, is you're going to be forced to write mission orders and execute mission command as designed. Trust your subordinates, start to use brevity codes. What we're looking for is, if you're doing a bub on the radio, we're going to home in on it, we're going to find it fairly quickly, and we're going to identify that grid. The shorter the transmissions, the fewer the transmissions, the less chance that we're going to be able to hone in on you. The more data we collect between us and the intelligence community, the quicker we're going to be able to identify precisely who you are, where you're at, and shoot it. You know, we share the same data. So the big thing is, don't use your radios as much. Now, obviously, that's a challenge. So there's a technical thing that the Army has to get after. How is it that we move data on the battlefield? What's really interesting is, from my perspective, when you look out there and you ask, hey, so what kind of radio is this using? Oh, it's this really unique, special thing. So who else is using it? Just us. So what I'm going to be able to do is, on the battlefield, our adversary will be able to identify every single one of those, let's use RCVs, and then they're going to be able to identify where the RCVs are being controlled at. And then, because they're probably fairly smart at this, they're probably going to shoot the things that are farther away, knowing if they kill the human, they don't even have to kill the vehicle. So these are the things where we need to mature the technology, the technical layer, in order to figure out, how do we fight in this, and how do we let you move that data around? Part of the foundational question we're asking about the network is, where do we store the data? How do we move the data? And just as importantly, when do we move the data? Imagine going radio silent, getting ready to go into the attack, and then all of a sudden somebody decides to query your POL status. Well, there goes that. So it's challenging, and we haven't done this. We are going to have to learn it. It's going to be difficult, and it's going to take everyone in the room to make everyone that's a 17 series work really, really hard to get this right, because we're learning it for the first time in a long time. Very few people have fought in the EMS. Even fewer people have fought in the cyber, and this is a skill the Army has to relearn.
Thank you, sir. This will be our last question, and we'll go to paddle number 3. Go ahead.
Thank you, gentlemen. Captain Oppenheim, Maneuver Captain's Career Course. What would you say are the biggest changes you've seen for talent management and personnel management, both within your own respective areas and for integrating with Maneuver?
Yeah, so I'll start this. First of all, as we designed the Long Range Fires Battalions, those are capabilities that, as General Flynn mentioned yesterday, will immediately require integration into our joint force. And that's a special kind of person. And so we have to physically, because there are very few of those, we have to physically handpick those folks. They're selected. They're the top personnel. They have the ability to integrate. Same with the non-commissioned officers that are assigned to those units. So from the artillery side, that's where we're looking. And it's the same challenge, though, as the proponent for some of these new capabilities is, how do I develop the doctrine to support that when we've got a material capability that's being fielded and we're putting our talent out there immediately, but there's a gap. And so what we've got to do at the center is immediately bring them from the operational force back into the generating force to help us keep up with the pace and ever-changing character of that warfare. And so from a captain, company battery troop commander perspective, that's how we've changed some of our talent management on the field artillery side. The same thing applies with some of the new capabilities that we're providing to the operational force on the air defense side. So from the MCOE, some of those capabilities, we've got to manage those personnel a little bit differently and look for the talent that can help us then keep up with the doctrine, the training, and the leader development requirements to support those capabilities that we're providing to the operational force. And that's one example. We could talk about the multi-domain task force where we all have equities in that. That requires a special capability from all the COEs and a special type of talent from some of, in my case, the best targeting warrant officers that we have across the community and how we leverage their capabilities. And I don't want to speak for the cyber and intel communities, but I would offer they probably have to do the same. Any comments?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'll dig into the talent management piece. So cyber branch, we're sort of kind of special in many different ways. So, just deal with it. You can smile. It's okay. So, generally our average recruit, 23 to 25 years old. 1 in 4, the 1 in 5 has a bachelor's degree. Average GT score 119. So these aren't your run-of-the-mill people that are joining the Army. Now, General Brito brought up this morning, hey, what keeps us in? It's actually interesting. Everybody talks about the pay. Everybody focuses on the pay. And to be fair, cyber soldiers are eligible for up to $1,950 extra a month, for an operator, master, enlisted. But that's not what keeps them in. Not once have I run into a soldier. That's just one of the factors that helps keep them in. We did a survey, and the number one thing that keeps soldiers in the United States Army, cyber soldiers, is mission. Believing that they're part of a team, believing that they're going to make a difference. So when it comes to talent management, when it comes to the people that you want in your formations, I will tell you, AIM, BCAP, CCAP, the path that the Army has put us on, Townley Hedrick, if he's floating around out here, this is the best thing that has ever happened to the Army from a leadership perspective. And it's the best thing that's happened to Cyber Branch from a leadership perspective. I'd offer to all of you, if those leaders that are out there, when you're looking for that 17 to join your formation and AIM, if you want them to come to you, if you want that one-to-one match, tell them that they're going to be able to make a difference. Give them a challenge. This is what they're looking for. It isn't about the money. It's about leadership. And that's no different in Cyber Branch than it is with any other branch in this room.
Just while ICO's getting his thoughts together, I've just put a plug in for Project Athena. And I know most of you are going through that, at least here in Bolick and at the career course. Big fan of that. It is, if nothing else, it makes you self-aware on the areas where your strengths are and where you need to improve. And I would offer it as you continue throughout your career, and the time comes for BCAP and CCAP and some of the other professional scores. The chief, the former chief staff of the Army started this program. I was a field artillery commandant, and when we stood that program up, and it is paying huge dividends from the field artillery and air defense artillery branches. The officers and senior non-commissioned officers now that we're seeing are more self-aware and understand where they need to improve and continue to improve in those areas throughout their careers. So big fan of Project Athena.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So on that talent management side, Captain Oppenheim, it's a great question. There's a couple things. Again, General Beagle would say the time to make friends is not when you have a problem. The time is now. So I'm going to reinforce again teamwork. And even for us within those folks on that intel side, the folks at this table right here, I have worked with somewhere else in my life because it's a small Army, and around the world in the military, it's actually pretty small too. So you never know who you're sitting next to now or you're working with that will be there to help you in your mission in the future, or you might have to be there to help them. But on the talent management side, for Intel, we've got a lot of MOSs, and I won't talk about all of the let's say the geeky side of it, because there are people who need to do technical analysis and other things. And there have been a lot of changes in there as technology changes, so you have to keep them up. At the tactical end, the folks you see most are 35 Foxes or all source analysts. And those folks and those 35 Alpha officer versions of that, and 350 Fox is the version for warrants. Those people have got to actually get inside your head. They have to understand you as a commander. They have to understand the equipment that's out there. So if there's one thing that we have to continually identify, assess, and then train, it's for our intel folks to actually, one, know their job, do their homework, understand the enemy, and then be confident in their assessment. Because most commanders, they've got a gut feeling. They know how they think the enemy's going to operate, and all they're looking for is either a confirmation of that or maybe someone to generate options or some alternative hypothesis. And maybe I don't believe you, and maybe I do, but you might have just given me the piece of information I need to formulate a plan so that I'm not caught in a movement to contact. That is a difficult art and skill to put into folks, particularly at a low 10 level or a junior officer. But that's actually that goal in the talent management. The last thing to answer his question is on data literacy. It's a big word. People use it, experimentation in strange ways. What I would tell you is that sensor to shooter, that data, it takes discipline. We're a commander-centric Army. Commanders like PowerPoint sometimes. Maybe you like a map. We're all different. We have to figure out what the minimum amount of data is that needs to come to us to make a decision, and we'll be fine. And I think that's the piece that we're focused on, is how do you make sure you get the right data to the right level fast enough so you're not dead in 8 minutes. And that is really that piece that we're focused on. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your comments and that insightful discussion there. That was really great. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please give them a round of applause.